welcome to Dialogue. During the post-pandemic period, the Chinese economy has been recovering at a steady pace, and the country has committed to only opening wider. So what can the world expect from China's economic recovery, and how likely will the dominance of the US dollar be affected by the ongoing Ukraine crisis? To discuss these issues and more, I'm pleased to talk with Michael Hudson, professor of economics at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the discussion, Professor. A year ago, also at the Boao Forum, Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed this global security initiative. And 1 year has been there, and we see that the Ukraine crisis continues. And of course, the future of the world is increasingly uncertain. And also tensions grows between China and the United States. So I wonder, what's your thoughts on this idea, on this proposal?
I think the United States is going to go its own way. China's proposal is a reasonable proposal. It's how the world could evolve in mutual gain, where countries will gain from each other. But that's not the kind of the world that the United States wants. And so there's going to be a clash. And the question is, how is this clash going to work out? Even if you don't agree with the diagnosis of how the Americans are viewing the world, you need to know how they're thinking about it, because I believe, and many Americans believe, that American policies are leading the whole world into something very needless, breaking it apart, separating it into two halves. The United States is driving all the other countries together, it seems, in a defensive mode. And what is happening in the United States seems to be a completely different road from that which other countries are going along. If you look at how the mistakes that the Russians made from the 1990s on, their mistake was that they believed other countries would act in their own self-interest and act reasonably, and that didn't happen. Europe and the United States could have ended the Cold War in 1990, but instead they escalated it. And Europe could have reoriented itself towards the part of the world that's growing: China, Russia, Iran, the Near East, and instead it's turned to the United States, even though the United States has pretty much destroyed German industry by cutting the pipelines, for instance. So coming out with a good idea does not mean that other countries are going to follow their self-interest.
Mm-hmm. Well, speak of that, you mentioned Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and the Chinese, basically a brokership. You can see Iran and Saudi Arabia achieved a rapprochement and agreeing to re-establish their diplomatic relationship. Many people say that's a victory, or you can say that's basically putting the concept of the global security initiative into practice by the Chinese side.
Well, it's amazing what's occurred. The split within Islam between the Shiites and the Sunni was so large that it had led to a bloody war between Iran and Iraq before, that was encouraged by the United States. And the reason that China was able to negotiate a rapprochement was that the United States has sort of declared war on all the other countries. It's declared war on the Near East by grabbing the oil. It declared war on Iran for many years for not selling its oil to the West and not letting the West take over its oil way back in 1954. China is coming and telling people there is an alternative. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be a unipolar world where the United States is able to get all of your economic surplus and transfer it to itself. We can all get rich by keeping our wealth with each other and not fighting each other. So that's basically the alternative that the world has.
Picking up on what you have said about the U.S., global attention has been on the recent development or the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank and also the Signature Bank in the U.S. So what does this tell us about the problems in the U.S. banking sector, for example?
The problem, both for the United States and Europe, stems from 2009, when President Obama decided to bail out the banks. In the United States, there were so many fraudulent loans for mortgages, bad loans that could not be paid. And instead of letting the banks go under, that were criminal, the Sheila Bair, who ran the Deposit Insurance Corporation, wanted Citibank, First National Citibank, really to be taken over, because she said these banks, the biggest banks in America, have behaved crookedly. They've written false mortgages, and there's a word for that: junk mortgages. They've falsified income statements by the borrowers. They falsified the value of the property. We can't bail them out. We've got to take them over. But President Obama said, my main campaign contributors are the banks, and I'm going to save the banks. And the Federal Reserve and Obama has spent $9 trillion since 2009 in quantitative easing. That is, the Federal Reserve has flooded the banking system with money to buy real estate, to buy stocks, to buy bonds. And from 2009 to today, we've had the biggest bond market boom in history. Interest rates went down from 6% to almost 0.1%. So there's been a huge increase in wealth in stocks, bonds, and real estate owned by the wealthiest 1% in the United States and by the banks. Well, finally, the question is, how could the United States ever begin to raise rates again? You've held rates at almost zero for years. Well, finally, the Federal Reserve said, we're worried that now that COVID is over, workers are making more money. And the job of the Federal Reserve is to keep the economy from growing, to keep it in recession, to keep down wage levels. So the head of the Federal Reserve a few months ago said, we need 2 million Americans to be unemployed so that people will be so desperate for work that they will lower their wages because wages are creating the inflation. And we have to lower wages so that companies can earn more money to support the price of their stocks and their bonds. And so they began to raise interest rates, basically just to fight labor. But what they didn't realize that when you raise interest rates, the price of bonds goes down. When you higher interest rates mean that there's less credit to buy bonds or real estate and housing. So bond prices have gone down, real estate prices have gone down. And this means that the bank reserves that are held in bonds and mortgages and long-term loans, the bank reserves were going way down. And they couldn't cover the deposit. So there's a fictitious capital in the United States. There are people owe money, banks owe money without having any idea whether they can pay or not. And the Federal Reserve wonders whether it's going to have to create another $9 trillion. The Federal Reserve wants to inflate asset prices, but not wages and not consumer prices. And it's very difficult to help the 1% of the population while hurting the 99%.
Seems there's a tough situation. Related to that, you once said, represented by the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, America makes use of dollar hegemony to create instability in the financial market and bring other countries into economic difficulties, from which the U.S. benefits. Can you tell us more about that, the impact of U.S. monetary policy, especially on those vulnerable countries from the, global south?
Well, the global south countries owe a very large dollar debt. That means they have to make exports and produce things in their own currency to buy the dollars to pay the debts that they've taken out at very low interest rates. Well, when the United States raises interest rates, that means that Europe and other countries are trying to take advantage of the new high interest rates, 4%, 5% for Treasury bills, and there's a movement into the dollar. The dollar is going up in value against the global South currencies. That means that South America, Africa, and Asian countries have to export much more in order to pay their rising debts. The rise in interest rates increases the debt burden for the global South. And this is happening at the very moment where the United States has imposed sanctions on Russian oil, Russian gas, and Russian grain and food, so that energy prices are going up for the global South, food prices are going up for the global South, and because of the manipulated markets for American technology, the American prices are going up and the dollar is going up. So how are these countries going to pay? The situation today is very much like it was after 1982, when Mexico could not pay its medium-term foreign debt, and all of a sudden, throughout Latin America, there were defaults. And it's obvious today that countries in the global South have to choose. Are we going to pay the foreign debts, the creditors, or are we going to import energy and food to feed our people and keep our economy going? That's the choice. And the International Monetary Fund that the United States runs tells them you're just going to have to starve, you'll have to impose austerity, you'll have to import less oil and gas, less food in order to pay the debts. And the question is, how can other countries, politicians, remain in office if they're acting to pay the United States instead of helping their own countries grow? This is the problem the global South is facing today.
Well, that problem obviously has a lot to do with the status quo of relying on the U.S. dollar or the domination of the U.S. dollar in the global financial system. And if you take into consideration of how U.S. reacts to Russia, for example, sanctions including taking over the foreign reserves basically by the Russians, and also that by the Venezuelans and even the Afghan foreign reserve that's taken over by the U.S. So that serves as a warning message to a lot of countries. If you are smart, you want to distance yourself from the dollar at least a bit in order to probably, and then better choice, to diversify your foreign reserve to safeguard your assets.
Well, this is what's so ironic. As you've just said, the United States has got a free lunch from issuing dollars ever since it went off gold in 1971. The United States can simply print dollars. Most of these dollars end up in foreign hands because of American military spending. So basically, when other central banks, China, Russia, all other countries, pull dollars in their Federal Reserve, they're lending back to the United States the money that the United States has spent abroad in surrounding them with military bases. Well, you'd think that America would want to keep this free lunch, this dollar dominance going forever. And yet it's doing just the opposite. As you've just pointed out, the United States foreign policy is driving Russia and other currencies away from the dollar because it's not safe. President Biden has said that China is America's #1 enemy. And one of our generals has said in 2 years, we're going to go to war with China. Well, obviously, I'm sure that the Chinese government is worrying, well, is America going to do to us what it did to Russia? Is it going to just grab all of our foreign reserves in dollars? Is it going to just grab all of our property that's abroad? So other countries are all trying to, they're afraid to hold dollars because America says we can cancel dollars at will, and we're at war with the world. And if they're at war with the world, then you don't want to hold the currency of a country that's at war with you. So the world is splitting apart. The United States wants to grab TikTok. The United States has told China, if you have a profitable innovation, if you have a new technology, you have to sell it to us. We have to make the money from TikTok. We have to make the money from your technology because that's how we want the world to work. Well, obviously, this is economic warfare with the rest of the world, and the dollars are part of the military warfare with the rest of the world. So yes, the United States is driving other countries away from the dollar, and some people say this is like shooting yourself in your own foot.
To the Ukraine crisis, you once said that in reading the newspapers, one gets the feeling this war is about Ukraine and NATO fighting Russia, when actually America is using the conflict between NATO and Russia as a means to control its allies and the West as a whole. Tell us more on that point.
Well, President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken have said again and again that the war in Ukraine is only the first conflict that in a broader war that is going to last 20 or 30 years. Well, obviously, the United States is not going to fight 20 or 30 years only in Ukraine. It's going to go beyond Ukraine. It's going to extend throughout Asia. The United States policy is to surround Russia, to surround China, and ultimately try to have what is called a color revolution to break up Russia into 5 different countries and to break China up into 5 different countries. So it's trying to take the Uyghur section in the West, to break that separately. These are the plans that the military have drawn up, and they're published, and everybody knows it. So obviously, what it seems to be just a military war is actually a war over how the whole world economy is going to be structured over the next 10 or 20 years. Is it going to be structured under U.S. control? And are other countries going to be run for the benefit of the United States economy, or will they be run to help each other grow by mutual trade and investment with each other, by becoming independent of reliance on the United States for their food, for their technology, for their computer chips? How are they going to get independent? And you could say that what we're seeing in the next 20 years as a result of the U.S. extending the Ukrainian war is the whole rest of the world's revolutionary war for independence. And this may take a military form, or it may just simply take an economic form. The Americans have been able to reduce Europe to a colonial status. So the first conquest in the Ukraine, the fighting in Ukraine, has been Germany and Europe. America has destroyed German industry by blowing up the gas pipelines in Nord Stream, and that means that German steel industry cannot be competitive, fertilizer industry cannot be competitive, Italian glass industry cannot be competitive, and the United States has told Germany, well, why don't you move your industry away from Europe, move it to the United States, where you can buy gas and oil at much cheaper prices now that we don't let you buy Russian gas and oil anymore. So this is the first real crisis, and it's a social and revolutionary crisis of the Ukraine war is actually in continental Europe itself, in Western Europe. But obviously the United States wants to spread it as much as it can eastward towards Russia and China. And the question is, will other countries be able to create their own trading system, their own alternative to the International Monetary Fund, their own alternative to the World Bank? Will they be able to essentially say, we have a different idea of how the world is going to develop? And that was the idea that you posed in your very first question of what exactly is the China initiative in the world today.
Well, U.S. officials have made it public that the goal in Ukraine is to weaken Russia. As you said, we see the European countries are also weakened in a similar manner. They imported costly oil and gas from the U.S. Their industries are moving to the U.S. Lured by the U.S. protectionist policy, as well as the cheap oil and gas there. So, what's the best way out for European countries?
Uh, there's no real easy way out for them. The problem is that the European political leaders are pro-American, but the population is demonstrating in the streets against the United States takeover. The United States has meddled in European politics and has simply given millions of dollars to European leaders. Quite frankly, it bribes foreign leaders and keeps them loyal to the United States. There really is, in Germany, there isn't any alternative party for peace. There's no alternative party to say, wait a minute, if we would invest and move our industry with Russia and China, they are the growing parts of the world. Here's the choice the Europe has. The United States and Canada are a shrinking economy. They're getting poorer and poorer ever since 2009. The rest of the world, China, Russia, the Near East, the Global South, they're growing. So who do you think Europe's future lies with? Would it lie with the growing part of the world or with the shrinking part? Well, so far, its politicians want the shrinking part. The people want the growing part. So Russia has said, well, we're not going to let, Europe has said, we won't let Russian TV be broadcast in America anymore. We're going to control the newspapers and the magazines so that people are told that Russia and China are the enemy. And we have to fight Russia first, because if we fight Russia first, then we can go in and break it up and we can attack China from Russia. Biden keeps saying the real enemy is China, not Russia, but we have to defeat Russia so that it can't help China. We want to isolate China and make it isolate it and make it go by itself. But China's doing just the opposite policy. It's strong enough to resist, and it's self-sufficient in food and its own products, and it's reaching out with the Belt and Road Initiative and other initiatives to integrate with other countries. And so the United States is going to be left with the only country that it can control will be Europe, not Asia, and not the Global South.
Well, speaking of China, China has set this year's GDP growth target at around 5%, giving priority to restoring and expanding domestic consumption, according to a report on government work at the annual two sessions in Beijing not long ago. Are you optimistic about the Chinese economy during this post-pandemic period?
Yes, I am, because it's not simply that China's GDP is growing, it's that the kind of GDP that it's producing is to raise living standards. Most American increase in GDP is money made by the financial sector, money made by the banking sector in interest charges and financial charges. But China uses money as a public utility. The government controls the money supply, and it doesn't spend the money that it creates primarily on arms and military. It spends the money on actual civilian growth. So the question is, it certainly needs to rebuild its economy from COVID. Its idea of rebuilding the economy is not to create billionaires in the financial sector, but to create prosperity for all of the people.
Prosperity, one of the Chinese goal, or common prosperity, one of the features of the Chinese style modernization. Well, China is moving, marching towards modernization as the country strives to realize its second centennial goal. So what's your take on the Chinese modernization, or the modernization with the Chinese characteristics?
Well, it's very different from the United States, because the United States, since the 1980s, has done what England did. It's privatized public infrastructure into monopolies that extract monopoly rent. Especially, this is the case in pharmaceuticals and healthcare. 18% of America's GDP is for healthcare, much higher than any other country, because of the monopoly prices that drug companies are allowed to charge. The United States the government spends enormous amounts of money developing new drugs, but then it gives it to its campaign contributors and lets them charge monopoly prices. Same thing in transportation. The United States transportation network is pretty much fallen apart. Here in New York, every single day, they're falling apart problem. But China treats its roads, its railroads, its airlines as public utilities, and it's not trying to create monopoly prices for the owners of roads and banks of utilities. It's trying to lower the cost of living so that Chinese people don't need to have high enough wages to pay for monopolized healthcare, monopolized transportation, monopolized electricity. The price structure and the cost structure of China is much lower than the United States, and that's what makes it so much more competitive than the United States and more competitive than other countries.
Well, on that note, we conclude today's show. Many thanks to Professor Hudson. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.